It's a pleasure to be with you, although virtually. Can you see my slides? Yeah. All right, great. So in a way, I feel it's a little bit unfair for me to be speaking of all that stuff because it's not just my work that I'm going to be commenting on here. It also involves several students whose name you can see listed here. So Andrew, Jacob, Kyle, and Christian. And obviously it involves Alia from the library, with whom none of this would be possible or would have happened in the first place, really. So I think it's a great example of the sort of collaborations that I'm interested in, that have worked, and that I'd like to see more of. So I'll do a brief contextualization of the framework, essentially, in which we did all that research, if you want. So last fall, so that's already a year ago, I created a new machine learning course at Miami. I've done it somewhere else, but it was the first time at that level that it was offered at Miami. And the goal, based on some research that I've done and published before, is to ensure that people have skills for data science that go through projects. In other words, the idea is that every semester, there are students in this course who need to do a project. And I want the project not to be something that I make up and has essentially no interest apart from training. I want a project that is useful, because if 4 or 5 students are going to spend so much time in it, they might as well do something that serves a purpose for themselves, for a broader community. So that's why I always try to partner with people who have the right questions to ask and data that might support that. So to figure out the frame a little bit here within the course, so we have to think of machine learning as part of an ecosystem, essentially. So some people study machine learning for the sake of machine learning, and that's perfectly fine. There's a lot of theory, a lot of methods building, that is fine. But in applying that to data that some of you may have, it's a little bit different. So the nature of applied work is what I'll be commenting on here. So if you think of what we can offer from the machine learning side, it's pretty broad, essentially. So that's why we need subject matter experts to tell us what is the right question. So at a very, very high level, if we have enough data, we might start finding the themes, how the themes maybe change over time, across places. That's something that we call unsupervised. It's about finding themes or association, essentially. Another thing we can do is predictive. And both are really big umbrellas or subcategories of machine learning. Now, if I tell you I can predict things or find whatever comes together, that's not very useful. That's very high level. So that's why I need people who know what the real problems are, the problems of interest. So subject matter expertise is essential for machine learning work. I'm not a big fan of machine learners who try to double up as subject matter experts without really having that expertise. So I'm more comfortable on equipping students with skills and working with people who have data and an understanding of how it was collected, what it means, what should be done with it. So in the problem that we're going to look at in just a few slides, we're going to see how Alia helped us make sense of the problem, the data, the context, and all that. So whenever you have data, well, what is unique about that data? What would be an important question to ask? What have people asked before? What did they find? It's all about the contextualization of the field. There is something we don't have much time to discuss today, but I want to point out that the library does excellent work in that. So we have Elias, we have Sarah. They work a lot on data acquisitions through very novel means, through the lab that's on the 3rd or 4th floor. I haven't been there for a while. The lab that's up there, essentially, wherever it is, up. So there's really nice work in that virtual environment there. It's not something that we can discuss within the few minutes I have now, but I just want to point out it's also something very nice. And I think Elias is just joining us for that. So what we're going to discuss for a few minutes, that's the postcards collection. So when we started, about 21,000 of them were digitized, maybe more since then, but that's really a very massive number. So the discussion started with that. There is an extremely large postcard collection. What can be done with it? Many discussions start like that. You have a unique data set. What would be interesting to do on that? And so if you think of the postcard, I honestly might do a poor job at explaining what's in it because that's not quite my expertise. But well, hopefully someone in the room can help me if there's a question on that. In short, this is the type of stuff you're looking at in terms of metadata and characteristics. So for each postcard, I'm really impressed by the work that was put in there in categorizing it. So each postcard has its locations, its GPS coordinates, a list of subjects, You know, for some of them, if they have been used, when, to whom, where. So it gives you a lot of geographical information. And perhaps most impressively for me, many of these postcards are digitized. So some students and colleagues went through the pain of by hand writing everything they could see into a computerized format, digitized format. And that opens up a lot of very interesting research avenues for questions at that scale. So in terms of questions, when the students started, this is what they started expressing an interest in. So this is what they initially wanted to study. So for example, as you can see on my screen here, the question was, is there a growth of postcards showing an interest in public parks because of the growth, the parallel growth in environmental concerns? So as we see over decades how American culture changes, do we see that being reflected in the postcards? Can the postcards even tell us ahead of time how culture is changing at a larger scale? So these are typical questions you may ask. Then, since we have text that people send, we can ask what they say, what are the themes, and connect that. So for example, if people use a certain postcard, will that change what they're going to write about? Will in any ways? So which one mediates the others? You can also say, given where cards were sent, what about neighborhood deprivation? What about social class? What about the places to which cards are sent, and hence the sort of people who are involved in writing them? So there are lots of questions initially that could be asked. Now, what I really like for students is to realize that research is not a straight road, essentially. So many students, when they start doing research in data science, including on the postcards examples here, they think of, I do step 1, 2, 3, 4, I'm done in 3 months, that's it, the end. And I don't think that's realistic, and I don't think that's the best learning outcome. So what I love the most are surprises, actually. I'm a big fan of surprises, because surprises stick, people remember them. So when students realize that something they do doesn't work, then what? Because in their professional life, they're going to have to do damage control. They're going to try, fail, succeed. And it's really great if they can do that first in the classroom here before having the skills out there. And for the anecdote, the road you can see on the bottom right is where I learned driving. So that's where I grew up. And it's not a straight road. It's an interesting one to drive on, I can tell you that. So what did the students find? Well, initially nothing worked at all, essentially. It's interesting for them to learn that, to see why. So they applied the right techniques, but the data did not give us what they were expecting, essentially. So do people have different sentiments over time? No, flat spectrum, like dead, basically. So it doesn't matter when you're looking at, their sentiments about parks don't really change. Doesn't matter whether you have sentiments when it comes to rivers, parks, trees. It's pretty flat spectrum. So we could not pick up any signal whatsoever in terms of environmentalism interest. It's flat throughout times. What do people say on postcards? Well, pretty mundane things for the most part. So when they looked at the themes, dear Papa, love you, will be there soon. Mother is happy, basically. It's interesting in its own right, but it's not going to tell you philosophical debates. It's a postcard. It's not an essay. You know, it's a bit different there. So the students did it. They learned the techniques, and they were like, "Whoops, doesn't work." So what about we use very fancy machine learning techniques to automatically annotate the postcards, to detect graphically what's the visual element, so that people don't have to say that by hand, don't have to code that. So we tried. So here's a postcard, and here's what the computer detected. So the computer detected that there are 5 bottles on a shelf. Apparently, they're boxed in pink. They might be hard to see, so I'll briefly annotate that for you. So here, the computer detected that there are 5 bottles. I don't know about the others, but these 5 bottles, the computer liked very much. The computer also detected that there is a chair here. So that's it for that. The methods were pretty rigorous. It's just, here is the state of the art, here is where we're at. And here the computer detected there's a clock. Because if you look carefully, that is true. Computer don't lie. There's a clock right there. So students tried, and they were very excited to do deep neural networks, to do image processing, object recognition. And yes, they did recognize objects, but. So at the end of the day, I think it's not done, but it's a turning point, because at that point the students said, nothing is working, we are sad, what do we do? And then that's when I think it becomes interesting. Then they say, well, what other patterns can we extract? It's all about finding patterns in data. And they turn to extracting colors for the postcards. So each postcard you're looking at here on the bottom right can be looked at as a set of dominant colors. Now, why would you like to do that, essentially? Because then you can find postcards by colors, you can help designers find the postcards they want, and you can have systems to interact with data that you never had before. So here is an example of what it's like. For each postcard now, you have all of the metadata at the bottom, which we had before in a different form, and then you can see all of the dominant colors. So you can do that for each postcard of interest. And perhaps more interestingly, if you're a designer, you can say, well, I'd like postcards or graphic elements that have the following colors. Which one can you find for me so I can reuse them in my graphic design? So that's a way to navigate a collection that wasn't possible before and was enabled through that. Is it how they started? No, students did not start that way, but they learned and then they made a useful tool. So at the end of the day, what do we have now? We have the ability to find inspiring postcards based on colors, and that's a way to find patterns in data. This might not have been the patterns you thought about at first, but that's research. You find, sometimes you fail, sometimes you succeed. It's a journey. And for the students, I love that journey, essentially. So graphic designers have a new way to interact, and essentially, it's adding value to the special collections. So I think it's a win-win, really. Special collections now have a new way to navigate and unlock value from what they've spent the time collecting. Students have learned many methods. They realized what works, what doesn't, given the data. So that's an essential component of learning environment. You do the right methods, you see if it succeeds. If it fails, you do the next thing, and so on and so on. And you learn and you grow as a person that way. So that's it. I'd like to thank everybody who was involved. We particularly appreciated the recognition from Laure and all the work that Alia has spent into that, as well as the students. So thank you so much to all of you there.